Welcome back, everyone. If you could please like and subscribe, I would really appreciate it. And I just want to say, as a disclaimer, everything I'm going to talk about in this video today is stuff that I paid for with my own money, and unfortunately, no one gave any of it to me for free. I'm just sharing this information with you about my journey, so maybe it could help you on your journey. The overall topic of today's video is why I switched from Drobos to Synology to protect my data. And there's a very important reason why. I'm going to start off by talking about why I got the Drobos and what my experience was with them over time and how they work, and sort of what my experiences now is with Synology. And I'm also going to touch on what it's like using the Synology product with my Mac Studio my new, lovely, beautiful Mac Studio, in order to edit video and photos as well. So let's start off with my history. So I've been using digital cameras, a professional digital camera, since 1998. And so over those years from 1998 to 2008, I acquired a fair amount of data that I was storing on single hard drives. And I know that I had some of those hard drives just outright fail. Oh, I also was storing it on CDs and then DVDs, which is kind of funny to think about. A CD would hold 700 megabytes of information, and back then we thought that those were going to last 100 years. Of course, they deteriorated rather quickly, and probably in about 7 to 10 years, they were no good anymore. Good thing, though, is that DVDs came along, and DVDs would hold 4.5 or 4.3 gigabytes of data, which is pretty funny to think about how quickly I shoot that much data now. But you would store your photos on you'd burn the disk and you'd put it in a catalog. And that's how I stored all of my data, or you'd have it on this plain hard drive. I know that I lost data through the deterioration of this media or through hard drives failing outright. And so this associate friend of mine, he assisted me from time to time. I don't think we really hung out, but he was an IT professional, and he suggested back in 2008 that I end up buying a Drobo. And the way that a Drobo works is that it uses a RAID system. Of course, they call it beyond RAID, but that's not really so important. Just know that the way that these things work is that you can set them up so that, let's say you have 5 drives in there, your data is spread, your data that could fit on 4 of the drives is spread out amongst the 5 drives in little chunks. And then if one of those drives fails, you just take it out and you put in a new one, and the housing and the software, perhaps, just repopulates that data over the drives. And so you get the capacity of 4 drives, but you're using 5 drives and you're protected. I ended up acquiring 5 different Drobo housings over the years. One of them outright failed. Okay, it was acting fishy and it wouldn't mount. And so I ended up getting a new housing and transferring the data over, that sort of thing. The reason I lost faith in Drobo is that it seems that the company was acquired by another company in 2020, give or take. And it also appears that they have not produced, or I should say shipped to retailers, any replacement stock since around early 2020. In fact, that year is when I bought the last housing, and I don't think anybody has that housing in stock. And so I'm just speaking from the perspective of a user, that I lost faith that I would be able to get new products from them or new software updates in the future, and that there was a potential one day where, let's say, the Apple operating system would update and the Drobo software would not update, and I would lose access to my data, and I'd have to end up accessing it through an old laptop or something in order to figure out some future solution. That's what I was worried about. Also, it's possible that if your housing fails, your data is still protected on the disks, and you could take those disks out of that broken housing and you can then put them into a new housing. The problem is, though, how do you acquire a new housing when there are no new housings? And so that was the other problem. And so I started looking at other solutions. And so one solution that I looked at was a Thunderbay 8 from OWC, or Other World Computing. This company seems to make products, or their history is making products for Mac, and so they have a lot of things in there that are geared towards video production, a lot of bells and whistles for that, and it seems like a great product, and it runs over Thunderbolt. The other thing that I was told to look at by a couple of people was a Synology 1821 Plus. And so the difference, for the most part, is that I believe the Thunderbay system is desktop attached storage, and the Synology system is a network attached storage. And that just means that you would be able to access it by multiple computers at the same time, even possibly remotely, and there's that functionality. Or you could just use the Thunderbay system and attach to one computer, and it could be your super hardware for editing video. I looked at reviews for both of the products, and for the most part, I saw a lot of reviews about the Thunderbay system. There were people who were saying it was very noisy, and that had me worried. Of course, it is a Thunderbolt connection, which is very fast, and the Synology unit comes stock with a 1 gig Ethernet connection, which is not very fast. However, you can upgrade it to a 10 gigabyte Ethernet connection. And the new Mac Studio, my favorite new computer, it comes with a 10 gig Ethernet port, so it works out perfectly with the Synology and the 10 gig cable. Now, that technology, that 10 gig connection, it's actually 1/4 the speed of the Thunderbolt connection that you're capable, in theory, of getting with the Thunderbay product. However, I looked at a lot of videos on YouTube where people were saying that they were using the Synology system in order to connect a lot of video editing computers to it and access and edit even raw 4K video. And they said that using this, 10 gig highway, if you will, was quite helpful overall. So I ended up deciding that I would buy the Synology, and there was one other reason. The other thing is that Thunderbay seems to be a smaller company, and Synology seems to be a much larger company that's also used by a lot of large companies for all sorts of other data storage and networking solutions. I don't even know if that's the right, I'm trying to sound maybe too fancy than I should be, but I just had more expectation that I wouldn't end up in a Drobo situation if I went with Synology, and I was just fearful of going with a smaller company for OWC. So I decided to give the Synology product a chance. So I ended up buying it. I got a 10 gig Ethernet card for it. I then also got some NVRM PCIe, I believe they're called memory cards or discs, that could go in there from Western Digital. And so the way that those are supposed to work is that when you're moving data to or from the Synology, or I should say if you're accessing data on the Synology a lot, or writing a file to the Synology, that it goes into this SSD cache. And then it's easier for you to access, and it will give you far greater speed times than using the data that's on the spinning disk. So essentially what it will do is it'll say, oh, John is accessing this video file. Let's put that into the cache, and then it will just sit there. And now every time he asks for the video file, it will be there on these super fast drives, and we'll deliver it to him faster. And then when John stops using that file, we'll delete it from the cache, but it will still exist on the computer. Or let's say that we see John is writing this really big file to our box here, the Synology. Let's write that file to the cache, and then when it's finished writing and done, we'll then transfer it onto the slower spinning disks. So it's supposed to just speed things up, and it's supposed to happen seamlessly there in the background. So the effect of all of this, though, is that I was at some time shooting even raw 4K video for this channel. In fact, in 2020, I shot almost everything in RAW on the Canon C200 for the quality. And then I got the C70, which is what I'm recording on right now, and it records in a codec that is not easily editable. But now that I have an M1 computer, the Mac Studio, I figured that I would be able to use this more efficient codec for recording my videos, which would take up far less space than what I was using previously, and that I would be able to store it on the Synology, and perhaps through the 10 gig connection, I'd be able to send that data to the Mac Studio and everything would work out really, really well. And so, as I can report, that is true, and that is the case. When I was using a Drobo 5D with a Thunderbolt connection, I was getting a 300 megabits per second of speed as tested with Blackmagic software. When I used the Synology with the 10 gig Ethernet connection, I got a speed result of 700. Now, using the Mac Studio in Final Cut, I'm able to edit these videos right from the C70 recorded internally without any rendering whatsoever. In fact, I can just put the footage into the timeline. There'll be dots across the top saying that it needs to render, and I can press play and it'll play right there on my screen without skipping a beat, not even a frame, anything. It'll just be flawless in 4K long op. Now I have seen, and I could grade it as well. Now, I have seen the computer have a little bit of a hiccup sometimes when it's processing 4K RAW or 8K RAW from the R5. It just needs to render a little bit. But processing these other codecs, it's perfectly fine. But before we move on, I just wanted to say that if you enjoy learning from me in these videos, you probably would also enjoy reading my 2 lighting handbooks. Volume 2, which just came out, has 23 different one light setups, and Volume 1 breaks down 20 different multiple light setups. In each of these digital downloads, you'll find behind the scenes photos, diagrams, and the final images, as well as a full breakdown of how I got the images. That way you'll be able to use it as inspiration or recreate the exact photos on set during your next photo shoot. And in addition to that, you'll get my Intro to Lighting Guide free. This 31-page digital download goes over all of the fundamentals of lighting. That way you'll have everything you need to get started in the studio. So for more information and to get your copy today, just go to johngress.com/lightinghandbooks. Now there is one place that I possibly went wrong, and I'm not so certain that I needed an 8-bay Synology. I probably could have gotten away with a 5 or a 6-bay. But I started on this journey with sort of an old school mentality. So back in 2008, when I got the Drobo, I got it at a time where hard drives are very expensive. And the idea of having 4 terabytes worth of 4 drives worth of data protected with only one spare drive, that was very appealing. And so I've been in that mindset since 2008 and doing that, so that when I switched over to the Synology, I thought that what I'm going to end up doing is buying 2 of these Synologies and then having a lot of data, maybe the first 15 years worth of data in one of them, and I'm going to just turn it off and leave it off unless I need access to the data, and then I'm going to have all the other data that I need access to, the more recent data, in that housing, the main housing that I'm going to use. When it came time when I needed to order the second housing, once I had proved that the first housing worked out really well for me, I started to realize, well, wait, I have a lot of old hard drives laying around, and I could probably start a different sort of backup system. I could probably start to put all of that old data so that it existed on 2 different 3.5-inch hard drives. And I could take one set and I could leave it at my studio, and I could take another set and leave it at my home office. And that way, if anything burns down, I'm protected. If a drive fails, I'm protected. And so that's what I just started to do. Once I started to do that, I realized that I probably don't need the capacity of the 8-bay because the 8-bay, if I put all 16s in it, it would give me 108, I believe, terabytes of storage. And that's currently probably like 6 years worth of data. And I don't think I need access live to 6 years worth of data. In fact, I think I only need access to maybe 3 years worth of data on the fly. And the rest of the data could really just end up in this cold storage situation. And so that's what I decided to do. I decided not to get that other housing and just to focus on that. Is my speed coming from the fact that I'm accessing all of these hard drives bundled together? Is that where my speed's coming from? And would that be degraded if I had fewer drives in there, if I had a housing with only 5 drives, or if I'm getting the speed from the cache? So if you know the answer to that, maybe share that down below. But just know that is something to think about. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for your time. I know this video was long, but this is a very complicated issue, and storing our data is important. I know it's not exciting or cool or any of that. Oh, and the very last thing I will say is I decided not to put my Synology on the internet. And I'll link to the video that I watched about security because there are some security considerations that you should take to protect your data, and it is more secure if the Synology is not accessible remotely. And while I know that's going to cause me some difficulty on some occasions, I think it's far better for me to be safe than sorry. So thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.